Hello and welcome back to the online learning session. Today we will move ahead in chapter 2, Nationalism in India. The topics to be covered in this lesson are number 1, Cripps Mission 1942, number 2, Quit India Movement, number 3, the Unit 4, the sense of collective belonging, number 4, in the Unit 4 itself, we will see the role of development of the sense of collective belonging in spreading of nationalism. So let us begin our discussion from the Cripps Mission. Students, a mission was constituted under Sir Stafford Cripps in 1942, and this is what we are going to examine from a 360-degree approach. Okay, now we see what were the aims of Cripps Mission coming to India. Cripps Mission came to India in 1942, and let us go through the aims. We see that following the World War II, which had started in 1939, in class 9th you have also studied the factor for triggering of the Second World War, and we see the Cripps Mission had several reasons to come to India. We see that Britain suffered many losses in Southeast Asia, plus Japan's threat to invade India seemed real for them. And who was ruling India at that point of time? Of course, Britain. Therefore, Britain wanted India's support. Point number 2, we see that Britain was pressurized by the Allies. Who were the Allies in the Second World War? The prominent Allies were USA, USSR and China, and Britain was pressurized to seek India's cooperation. Actually, we see that Britain needed India's support in the Second World War. Number 3, we see, therefore, Indian nationalists had agreed to support the Allies as they hoped for immediate transfer of substantial power. Indian nationalists wanted an immediate transfer of substantial power from the British sovereignty to India and complete independence after the war, as it seemed at that point of time that as the war ends, India will be given the freedom from Britain. Therefore, in hope of getting freedom, Indian nationalists agreed to support the Allies and particularly to support Britain at that point of time. Now let us go through the proposals of Cripps Mission. Students, we see that it proposed first of all to set up an Indian dominion, which we have already studied. The second most important development proposal of that point of time was setting up of a constituent assembly to frame a new constitution for the country of India, plus the members will be elected by the provincial assemblies and also nominated by princes. Third point, we see that any province of India which was unwilling to join, which did not want to join the Indian Dominion, could form a separate union. It means that we had a lot of princely states at that point of time, so whichever part did not want to become a part of Indian Dominion, it could go off and form a separate union of its own and have a separate constitution as well. Number 4, we see the transfer of power and the rights of minorities. Another significant point, the transfer of power and the rights of minorities would be safeguarded by negotiations between the Constituent Assembly and the British government. Therefore, in class 9th we have learnt in civics about the Constituent Assembly, so you can imagine, you can visualize how the negotiations might have been going on at that point of time between the Constituent Assembly and the British government. In the meantime, we also see until this new constitution came into force, India's defense would be controlled by the British, and the powers of the Governor General would remain unaltered. So one of the most important points which we learn from here is the defense. India's defense would be controlled by the British. This point says that until the new constitution came into force. So as we see, however, we got the independence in 1947. The constitution could only come into force completely in 1950. So till then, as in 1942, the Cripps Mission suggested whatever the time was going to be, whatever the year was going to be of Indian independence, till that the defense of India would be controlled by the British. But we see, students, that the Cripps Mission was proven to be a failure in India. Now let us examine and learn the reasons which proved to be failure for Cripps Mission. Students, we see that the proposal were seen as too radical by the British and as too conservative by the Indian National Congress, who wanted complete independence. In the second point, we see that the mission was rejected by the Indian National Congress. It was completely rejected by the Indian National Congress, the Muslim League and other Indian groups as well. So the second point here, which is most important, is that it was completely rejected. So this becomes one of the most important points for its failure. In the third point, we see the Hindu Mahasabha and the liberals were against the right of states to secede. Okay. Next we see the Sikhs objected because they thought any partition would have Punjab in the hands of Pakistan. Clear? They somehow wanted to remain with India. That's why they thought that any partition of India would leave Punjab in the hands of Pakistan. Clear? Which was, by the way, going to be a state formed on the basis of religion, and since Sikhs were not practicing the religion practiced by the Muslims at that point of time, therefore we see they objected here. In point number 5, we see the depressed classes objected because they were apprehensive about their status. In a country dominated by upper caste Hindus, we have already examined this fact in the limitations of the civil disobedience movement, so this was also rejected and objected by the depressed classes. Now we see it was also believed that the mission failed because of a clear lack of support for it by the Viceroy Linlithgow, British PM Winston Churchill at that point of time, and the Secretary of State of India, Leo Amery. So we see that though British government offered a mission, the British government sent a mission to India in 1942, again just like its offer back in 1930 for offering dominion status, this was also a sort of vague offer, as at that point of time we can see the restlessness, we can feel the restlessness of Britain in order to garner support from India for fighting the Second World War. Now we come to learning about the Quit India movement, which took place in 1942, and the reason why we have discussed Cripps Mission a bit in detail is that we see the failure of the Cripps Mission and the effects of World War II created widespread discontentment in India. The failure of the Cripps Mission and the effects of the Second World War left people totally unsatisfied with the administration of the British. This led Gandhiji to launch a movement calling for complete withdrawal of the British from India. Okay, now the movement was taking a serious turn. Here we see that Gandhiji launched a movement calling for complete withdrawal of the British from India. Therefore, in this light, we see that the Congress Working Committee in its meeting in Wardha on 14 July 1942 passed the historic Quit India resolution demanding the immediate transfer of power to Indians and quit India. So what was this resolution all about, students? We see this resolution was all about demanding the immediate transfer of power and the British quitting India. Clear? Now we come to see how the movement was actually launched, or we can also call it the stages of the movement. On 8th of August 1942 in Bombay, we see the All India Congress Committee endorsed the resolution which called for a non-violent mass struggle on the widest possible scale throughout the country. It was better if most of the regions of India participated in this movement, and here the historic do or die speech was delivered by Gandhiji, that either we have to do and seek independence, or even if we die in doing so, then we have to seek independence at any cost. Students, next we come to see how was this movement actually organized. We see that people observed hartals and demonstrations, and processions were accompanied by national songs and slogans. Now here we see hartals, demonstrations and processions as a part of the struggle to begin again in 1942, accompanied by national songs and slogans. Clear? Next we see that the movement was truly a mass movement which brought into ambit thousands of ordinary people, namely students, workers, and peasants. Now, this was a movement which brought into its ambit thousands of different kinds of people. They were ordinary people, namely students, workers, and peasants. We see different sections of the society to be participating in this movement which called for do or die in order to seek independence. It also see the active participation of certain leaders who have been mentioned here. You can go through this point, and in point number 6 we see that the British responded with much force. The British responded with much force, yet it took more than a year to suppress the movement. Now we see again that the British administration was reacting in the same way it had been reacting before. It again started using force, much force, yet it took more than a year to suppress the movement. You can see how solid the movement had become at this point of time, how solid the expectations of the people had become this point of time in order to seek independence and to let the British quit India. So therefore we see that this movement is known as the Quit India movement. Now students, we have come to unit 4, and here we will learn about the role of development of the sense of collective belonging. Point to be noted here is the sense of collective belonging in spreading of nationalism. Now students, if you try to recall the chapter 1, the French Revolution of class 9th of history, you'll come to see that the most important outcome of the revolution was the creation of nation states. Okay, now let us begin our discussion, and then we'll try to incorporate the point which we have recalled from chapter 1 of class 9th history. Students, we see that nationalism spreads when people begin to believe that they are all part of the same nation. Clear? Of the same nation. So the first point to be noted here is nation. When they discover some unity that binds them together. The second point to be noted here is unity, and this unity, we must always remember, binds the people of a nation together. So students, again we have come to the same point from where we had taken off, from where we had begun the chapter. We had begun the chapter, how does nationalism spread, or what is meant by nationalism. In this unit we are going to examine all the factors which contribute to the spreading of nationalism in a bit more detailed manner. Clear? So we see that when people begin to believe that they are part of the same nation, plus when they discover some unity that binds them together to show an allegiance for the same nation, that is how we see the nationalism to be spreading. For example, if we assume this to be India, then whether we go north of India, whether we go south of India, whether we go to the east or to the west, all the people who live in India will belong to the same nation. And we also see that a unity binds them together, but this unity needs to be discovered. They must discover this unity. For example, we have seen different sections of the society while participating in different kinds of movements. For example, here as well, in the Quit India movement, we saw that thousands of ordinary people, namely the students, workers, and peasants, participating in the movement. So whenever a movement has occurred in India, we have seen different sections of the people coming together, uniting. Okay, so what actually brings them together? Here we see that students are participating, workers are participating, peasants are participating. Here as well we can examine, we can easily see that different sections have come together, different sections of the society, of the country have united for a struggle against the British. So what actually brings them together? What brought them together in 1942 or in 1930 for the civil disobedience movement, or in 1920 for the non-cooperation movement? Students, it was the unity. It was the unity which brought them together. Be it north, south, east or west, the people felt that we belong to one nation, that is India. Okay, but this concept of nation had to be developed in the minds of people. Till now, people assumed that they were a part of British India, So the feeling of India was somehow developing in the minds of people since they had started coming together. They had started discovering the unity, the bond which they shared in a united struggle against the British. Because if we see whether it was north or south or east or west of India, each and everywhere people were highly oppressed by the British administration. Now they wanted an end to the British administration. They wanted the British to quit India, leave us by granting freedom. So we see how did the nation become a reality in the minds of people. How did people belonging to different communities, regions or language groups develop a sense of collective belonging? Okay. Now we see the sense of collective belonging came partly through the experience of united struggle. This is the most important point, student, here. The sense of collective belonging. What do we actually mean by collective belonging? That we are collectively, the people of India, whether they are living in any part of India, collectively belong to one nation, collectively owe an allegiance to only one nation, that is India. And how was this sense developed? How could they feel about this sense of collective belonging? It was partly through the experiences they learned by coming together in the struggles against the British government and the British brutalities. Okay, but we also see there were a variety of cultural processes through which nationalism captured people's imagination. So the first point here to be taken out are obviously the struggles. Second point to be taken out are cultural processes, and we'll try to discover all these points in more detail in the next lesson. For today, the lesson is restricted only till this topic. So what do we see in the first point? We see that it was the common struggles that united the people and let them develop a sense of unity, let them develop this sense of collective belonging. What? That until and unless we collectively prepare an opposition against the British, we are not going to win freedom. We are not going to win independence from them. Clear? Second point, we see the cultural processes, and in the due course of the lesson we will be discovering all the processes which sparked the feeling of collective belonging and sparked nationalism therefore. And here we see in the cultural processes that all these factors, all these points are there forming the cultural processes, in which we see that history and fiction, folklores and songs, popular prints and symbols, all these played a part in making of nationalism. So the crux of this slide lies in point 3, that we went back to our history, the glorious history of India, in order to tell British, in order to let them realize that how glorious the history of India has been, and they were ruining our country at this point of time. We were getting back to fiction in order to encourage and in order to motivate, in order to realize the potential of our national heroes through folklores, songs. We have come to learn about the national song, the Vande Mataram, popular prints of Bharat Mata, clear. Then we see flags, then we see the crescent in the flags, then we see the different colors in the flags. So all these symbols, all these texts belonging to history or of fiction, whether they were folklore or songs, all these symbols played an important part in making of nationalism, because all these symbols made the people realize, the people of India realize, that they owe a collective allegiance to the country, to the nation, and therefore in order to seek independence, in order to gain independence, or in order to win independence, they will have to come together, they will have to form a united front against the British, they'll have to fight collectively for their freedom. All these points helped in developing the sense of collective belonging, and this sense of collective belonging then helped empower the sense or the feeling of nationalism. That is how the nationalism spread at that point of time, and finally in 1947 we got our independence. So that's all for today, and we'll be meeting in our finishing lesson in the next part. Thank you.